Hello. So here's our deal. Today and next week, we will be finishing up Pirkei Avot. And after we finish Pirkei Avot, I'd like to study with you Kohelet, the Book of Ecclesiastes. And if you have any copy of a full Bible, it'll have the Book of Ecclesiastes. Or if you'd like to, sometime in the next 2 weeks, you can let us know when you're going to be in the neighborhood and drop by, and you can borrow one of the copies of the Chamesh Megillot, the 5 scrolls, the 5 Megillot, and you could use that as we go each week through one of the chapters of Kohelet, a fascinating book. So in the meantime, let's get back. Where are we? Pirkei Avot has 5 chapters. A 6th chapter was added sometime later, and this is made up of Braitot, of teachings of the rabbis 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, and it was added to Pirkei Avot, which is part of the Mishnah, which was edited in the year 200 by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Patriarch. And the reason for the addition of a 6th chapter was so that people could study it for the 6 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. Okay, so we're in chapter 6, the Braitot, and it's called Kinyan Torah. How does one acquire Torah? It's also referred to as the Braita of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was in the generation following Rabbi Akiba, so sometime 150, 200 in that period. And he perhaps combined or maybe even originated some of these teachings. So we're on chapter 6, number 7, Braita 7. And here's what it tells us. Gedolah Torah, great is Torah, shehi notenet chayim, for it gives life, li'oseha, to those who do it. Ba'olam hazeh, in this world, uva olam haba, and in the next world as well. So a couple of important things. You'll notice it says Torah is great because it gives life to those who oseha, who do it, perform it, act on it. It doesn't say those who learn it. So here the emphasis, and we've seen this before, it's a very important thing to study and learn Torah, but it's nowhere as important as observing, performing, doing the Torah. So the key word is oseha, like an oseh shalom. May God who does peace in the heavens, make peace for us. And the second thing to note about this phrase is that it gives you a double reward. Life in this world, life in the next world, in the world to come. So again, as we've said, clearly in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, there was a major belief that when you die, there's something else. There is a world to come. Exactly what it looks like, nobody knows, and the rabbis don't spend a lot of time talking about it. Just it's a promise. Part of the thing we have to remember is that 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries in Israel was a pretty miserable time. The Romans in the year 70 had destroyed the temple, slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Jews. The Romans in the year 135 had put down a second rebellion and once again had slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Jews. They plowed up the city of Jerusalem. They exiled anybody who lived there and who had survived. So this was a pretty difficult time. So a promise that this world is not all there is was probably something that people desperately needed to hear, right? And don't think this is all there is. You will be rewarded for all and compensated for all your suffering. In the meantime, what are we supposed to do until then? And the answer was that living a life of Torah, not only studying it, but performing it, can give you life in this world, can give you a meaning and significance while you're alive now. Okay, so again, notice the dual reward. This is going to become important. You'll see why. After having made the statement, it then goes on to prove it. And how do we prove any premise in rabbinic literature? The best proof of all is a verse. If you could give me a Bible verse, then that's going to be good. So we read Shene'emar, as it says, and now we're going to quote from the book of Mishlei. Mishlei is the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, Proverb 22. And it says, Ki chayim heim lemotze'ehem, for they are life to those who find them, ulechol bisaro marpeh, and health to all their flesh. Sometimes almost all the time, when you read a verse quoted in the Talmud, or the Mishnah when it happens, it's critical that you need to go back and actually open up a Bible and get the context. Because sometimes what the rabbis do is merely quote either the verse or part of a verse, and they don't give you the context, which you need in order to really understand the verse. So here's just an example of what's happening. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 22, it says as follows, they are life to him who finds them, healing for his whole body. Out of context, we're not really sure what they're talking about. If you went back to verse 20, 2 verses before, you'll see somebody says, my son, listen to my speech, incline your ear to my words. So let's give the context here. The book of Proverbs is probably from the realm of wisdom literature, probably 4th, 3rd century BCE. It's probably mainly secular, not very religious, and it's probably upper class, and it's probably geared towards a tutor who was hired by a rich father to teach his son wisdom that he's going to need for life. So here the father is saying, my son, listen to my speech, incline your ear to my words. And then he goes on to say why you should listen to what your father has to say, because my words are life to him who finds them. If you listen to me, it's going to give you life and healing for your whole body. Life, notice life in clause A, healing in clause B. You'll remember a couple of weeks ago, we said that the main element of biblical poetry is parallelism, that there's a line and it's broken into 2 sticks, S-T-I-C-H, and A and a B. And basically, most of the time, B simply parallels A, but you're saying it in a different way. Sometimes it will contradict, or sometimes it will complement, but mostly it will just repeat it using synonyms. Okay, so that's what we need to understand. B isn't necessarily, when the author wrote this, when he said B, he wasn't necessarily telling you anything different than he told you in A, but he was just being clever about it and repeating it for emphasis. But the rabbis didn't read it that way. To them, there's clause A, which means one thing, and there's clause B, which means something else. So clause A, again, says, they are life to him who finds them. And to the rabbis, life means life in this world. And then clause B says, healing for his whole body. And the rabbis understand this. And again, they're taking this out of context. They're imposing on the verse something that the author probably didn't intend. But the rabbis felt this is the Bible, this is sacred literature. And part of sacred literature is that it has levels of meaning, multiple levels of meaning. And so A means study, and by the way, what the Father says is, listen to my speech, hear my words. To the rabbis of the 2nd, 3rd century, speech and words are referring to Torah. My son, who's my is God, whose son, the Jewish people. Okay? Not how the author meant this. It was the rich guy telling his son, pay attention to what I'm telling you. But the rabbis reread this. God says to us, wisdom, follow my words. But to the rabbis, it's not about wisdom literature. It's not about advice, how to live your life. It's more on a holy level. It's Torah. Okay? So the rabbis have raised this to the different level. And you'll notice, again, the two clauses are proving the statement that we made in the beginning. Ba'olam hazeh, in this world, uva'olam haba, and in the world to come. Okay, and then we now continue. V'omer, and now they're going to quote another verse once again, from the book of Proverbs. And the second verse, this one is from Mishlei Gimel Chet, chapter 3, verse 8. Rifut tehi l'shadecha v'shikui la'atzmotecha. All right, and this is understand, it shall be health to your body, which seems to be the same idea we just saw in clause B, and marrow to your bones. So once again, sounds nice, but what are they really talking about? So if we go back to chapter 3, verse 8, we'll read the following. At the end of verse 7, it says, fear the Lord and shun evil. And then in verse 8, it says, it will be a cure for your body and a tonic for your bones. Okay, so the idea of fearing the Lord, shunning evil, that's what we're talking about. And the rabbis, of course, make this about the actual Torah, the book of Torah, the corpus of Jewish learning known as Torah. And once again, there's an A clause and a B clause. And the point that the rabbis want to make is, why, if the book of Proverbs is talking about ultimate promises of good things, of health, of life, if they make they say it twice, why do they do that? In this world and in the next world. So then we go on. And it further says, V'omer, and here's a verse that we're all familiar with, Eitz chayim hi l'machazikim ba, v'tomchecha mi'ushar. This is from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 18. It is a tree of life for those who grasp it, and all who hold on to it are blessed. Now, we all know that at the end of Shabbos service, when we put the Torah back in the ark, and we're thinking about the Torah that we just read, and we're looking at the Torah that we're about to pull the curtain on, right? We sing, Eitz Chaim Hi. It, that thing in there, that is a tree of life for all who will hold on to it, okay? Question is, what was the book of Proverbs, what was it originally talking about? So if you go to chapter 3 of Proverbs, verse 18, we read the following. It starts with, in verse 13, happy is the man who finds wisdom And again, over and over again, the book of Proverbs uses the word wisdom, doesn't talk about Torah. Probably in the 3rd century BCE, from rich upper middle class people, when they were talking about wisdom, it might have been wisdom in the sense of good advice, things to always remember, when you're conducting business, in your relationships, etc. Happy is the man who finds wisdom. Rabbis will always read wisdom as Torah. And then it goes on to say, because she, who is she? Back to verse 13, the man who finds wisdom. She is a tree of life to those who grasp her, and whoever holds on to her is happy. Okay, so clause A is tree of life, so that you follow the words of wisdom, or as the rabbis understand it, Torah, you will have life. And if you embrace it, you will be happy. So, of course, the writer of Proverbs meant these are the same thing, right? But to the rabbis, it was two different things. You will have life in this world, and you will be happy. You will find ultimate happiness where? Ba'olam haba, in the world to come. Okay, and then it goes on with another verse. Ve'omer ki livyat chen heim leroshecha va'anakim legargerotecha. They are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. This is Proverbs chapter 1, verse 9. So imagine rich people. We're talking about what would be the ultimate, the garland. Maybe even think about, the Roman or the Greek idea of placing this crown of leaves as a sign of victory on somebody's head, and some kind of necklace, some kind of chain. So once again, nice verse. What's the context? What's it talking about? So if we went back to Book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 9, and then in verse 8, it says, my son, notice that again, heed the discipline of your father, do not forsake the instruction of your mother. And then it continues with verse 9, which is quoted, for they, what your father taught you, what your mother taught you, for they are a graceful wreath upon your head, a necklace about your throat. Okay, and once again, the two clauses, the original writer was doing this poetically, but the rabbis read it, each clause is referring to this world and the next world. Okay, then we move on. Having spoken about garlands, it then continues with a similar verse, Proverbs chapter 4, verse 9. And it further says, V'omer titain l'roshcha livyat chen, ateret tiferet temagneka. It will place a graceful garland upon your head and bestow a glorious crown upon you. So again, we're interested in the context, and we go to Proverbs chapter 4, verse 9. She, referring back to verse 5, acquire wisdom, acquire discernment, because then in verse 9, she, wisdom, will adorn your head with a graceful wreath, crown you with a glorious diadem. Okay, and once again, this time instead of there's a garland, and instead of the necklace, there's a garland, and there's like a tiara, okay, that will be worn. And then ve'omer, and then we have another verse. Ki vi yirbu yamecha ve'yosifu lecha shnot chayim. So, for through me, capital M, for through me, God, your days will increase and years will be added to your life. So let's go to check that one out. That's Proverbs chapter 9, verse 11, where if you looked in Proverbs 9:10, it says, the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. So even though these were 3rd century BCE, mainly secular, upper middle class people, there still was a belief in God, not necessarily a ritual, a ritualistic, a religious sense that later generations would have. But of course, you always need to fear God, and the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. And then in verse 11, it says, for through me, okay, and the me here is not necessarily God, it's wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. For through me, through wisdom, your days will increase and years be added to your life. And again, the double clause, this world, the next world. And it further says, V'omer, orach yamim beyemina, long life in her right hand, bismola, in her left hand, osher v'kavod. There will be in the left hand riches and honor, kuvit. So let's look there. That's chapter 3 of the book of Proverbs, and that's verse 16. So if we look there, we will see once again, back in 13 it said, happy is the man who finds wisdom. And then in 16 it says, in her right hand, meaning in the right hand of wisdom. They're now personifying this idea of wisdom as a woman. In her right hand is length of days. You will live a long life, and of course to the rabbis, meaning in this world. And in her left will be riches and honor. Okay? And then we read V'omer, and it says, Ki orech yamim ushnot chayim v'shalom yosifu lach. And it further says, for a long life, years of life and peace, they will bring you. So once again, that's from Proverbs chapter 3, the second verse, where the first verse of chapter 3 says, my son, do not forget my teaching. Let your mind retain my commandments. And then the key verse that's quoted here, for they, meaning my teaching, will bestow on you length of days, years of life, and well-being. And of course, length of days means while you're on the earth, and years of life and well-being refers to after this life in the world to come. Okay, so there we get an example of how the rabbis read the book of Proverbs, which was all about wisdom, but they make it all about Torah. And remember the time frame, wisdom literature, probably 4th, 3rd century BCE, whereas the rabbis are 2nd, 3rd, 4th century CE. So we're talking about 3, 4, perhaps even 500 years later. Okay, so think, today versus Shakespeare, right? And then maybe even longer. That's the time difference and the world difference between practitioners of wisdom literature, and then 500 years later, the rabbis who are not interested in Greek and Roman wisdom literature and advice, but they've adapted the book and the phrase and the idea and the concept into being all about Torah. Okay, so that's Breita number 7. Let's look at Breita number 8. And we read the following. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So two Shimons, Shimon ben Yehuda, quoted Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. We remember how important it is to always attribute your teaching to the rabbi who taught it to you. Best thing of all is if you can quote a verse from the Bible. But if you can't, the second best thing is you quote your teacher. You never pretend that something your teacher said is something that you made up. And so it's critical always to give attribution. And this is what he said. Hanoi, which is beauty, v'hakoach, and strength, osher, riches, kovod, honor, chokhmah, wisdom, zikna, old age, v'haseva, seva means hair turning white or turning gray, v'habanim, and children. Those things are na'eh latzadikim, they are becoming to the righteous. Somebody who follows the Torah, studies the Torah, does the Torah, these are the rewards that they might get. And they're all, you know what, they fit that person, they are becoming na'eh latzadikim, v'na'eh la'olam, and they are also becoming to the world. I just want you to remember, let's remember how many there were. Beauty, strength, riches, honor, wisdom, old age, hoary head, and children. So there were 8 things. Okay, keep that in mind. You'll see why. So he's now going to try to prove those things, that if you study the Torah, this is what you're going to get. These are the rewards for studying Torah. The hoary head is a glorious crown achieved by a righteous life. Once again, we're quoting from the book of Proverbs, and here there's the notion of righteousness, righteous life, and hoary head is a glorious crown. Remember, before we talked about an actual garland, but if you live a long life because you have studied Torah and have followed Torah, what is the crown? Not necessarily the crown, the garland of victory, but your hair turning white, turning gray. And it is written, the glory of the young is their strength, the beauty of the old, the hoary head. That's from the book of Proverbs, chapter 20. And it is written, the crown of the wise is their riches. So he's pulling verses that speak about crowns, which you are crowned with after having achieved some greatness. And he's mentioning here strength and beauty and wealth. And it is written, children's children, in other words, having grandchildren, are the crown of the old. Best thing that that any person could have is to become a grandparent, is to have grandchildren. Parents are the glory of their children. That's from Proverbs verse 17. And it is written, the moon will be ashamed and the sun abashed, for Adonai Tzevaot will reign in Zion and Jerusalem. God's glory shall stand revealed before the elders. Okay, so the idea of what more could you possibly need? You won't need the moon at night. You won't need the sun during the day. Moon and sun will become trivial, secondary, because when Adonai Tzivaot, when the Lord of hosts ultimately reigns in Zion and Jerusalem, then God's glory shall stand revealed before the elders. And that's a quote from the prophet Isaiah. Okay, so it's an attempt, although he doesn't go through all 8 of the things, it's an attempt to sort of check off as many of them by proving them, well, we've got a verse that seems to prove them. And then, very interestingly, we have at the end of this Braita the following. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Elu Sheva Midot, these 7 virtues, right, that the sages ascribed, Shemanu Chachamim Latzadikim, which the rabbis said are the rewards of righteous people, Kulam Nitkayemu Barabi Uvevanav. All of them, all of these 7 virtues were fulfilled and were given to Rabbi. Now, you may remember back, I think, in chapter 2, we saw that there's one rabbi who is so important, he's called Rabbi. He is the rabbi. He doesn't even need his name. And who is that? That's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah, the Patriarch. So who was he? Probably born sometime around 135, died 217. He was born in the town of Usha. Usha was not too far from where Haifa is today, up north and towards the western coast. And remember, Jerusalem had been destroyed. Jews are kicked out of Jerusalem. Many of the people, the leaders certainly, reestablished themselves in different places. And now Usha became a key spot. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Patriarch, was the chief redactor and editor of the Mishnah, which happened around the year 200, 220, somewhere in there. He had been brought up in a wealthy family. He had learned Greek. He was certainly familiar with the Greek world because of his wealth, because of his knowledge of subjects outside the realm of Judaism, and because of his family's importance. He was the son of Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the son of Rabban Gamliel. So for generations, these people were the main leaders, secular leaders of the Jewish community in Palestine. And again, because of wealth, family position, and his knowledge of Greek and other subjects, he became the main intermediary for the Jews with the Romans. Okay, and one of the great things that he does is we're in a period of transition, a period of following destruction, and he is the one who, in a sense, helps the Jews to survive. How? By creating a law code that could be memorized, studied, because it was in concise Hebrew, short sentences. And the idea was that Rabbi Yehuda brings the 6 orders of the Mishnah, 6 major topics, and broken down to 63 tractates or small books, and it encompassed all of Judaism. And ultimately, at a time when everything was falling apart, the religion as we knew it, everything was gone, Rabbi Yehuda helps to recreate and give a foundation for a new Judaism, and it's the Mishnah. And so we're being told that all those, it says here, the 7 midot, the 7 virtues that the rabbis attributed to anybody who studies, you could see all of them in the life of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Remember, beauty, physical beauty. Number 2, physical strength. Number 3, wealth. Number 4, honor. People respected him. Wisdom, by virtue of what he knew. Old age, born in 135, died in 217. So he lived 70, 80, a long, long life. Hoary head, we're assuming that with age his hair turned. And children, he had children, grandchildren, many of whom became, important personages, in Judaism of the day. Just one small problem. You'll remember that when we counted the virtues, we saw 8: beauty, strength, riches, honor, wisdom, old age, hoary head, and children. And yet now, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh said these 7 virtues were all present in Rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and in his sons. So how do we explain that? It mentions 8, but then he says, and yeah, he had all 7. So the rabbis go to great difficulty to try to explain, how does 8 become 7? Who knows? Maybe beauty was, the main topic, and then the 7 things were the concept of beauty. It wasn't talking about physical beauty, all other kinds of beauty. Or maybe when it says, old age and the hoary head, these are not 2 separate things, that old age, which means your hair is going to turn color. And in those days, that was seen as something that people would look up to. Wow, look at that person. He's an elder. You could tell by the color of his hair. I want to share with you a beautiful commentary. This is from Rabbi Martin Cohen, Rabbi at Shelter Rock Jewish Center, and he put together, this edition of Pirkei Avot, and he wrote a commentary that's sort of stunning and magnificent. So listen to this about this issue of old age. In our world, youth is everything. In our world, you're old equals decrepit, but that's not what the rabbis thought. We all hope to grow old, by which sentiment we mean that we hope not to die young. Obviously, we moderns, with access to first world medical care, would set the bar considerably higher in terms of the actual ages we hope to attain than would have the sages of antiquity. But the Braita does not seem to be saying that attaining old age is a blessing merely because one has not died prematurely. Instead, it suggests that old age itself is a blessing, not only because attaining a venerable age is preferable to suffering and early death, but also in some sense because old age itself is preferable to youth. Think about that. Old age is preferable to youth. What's he talking about? According to Avot, Pirkei Avot, old age is wisdom. Old age is experience. Old age is insight into the ways of the world, which one cannot have while navigating the turmoil of youth or negotiating the traumata of middle age. Old age is, if one has devoted one's life to the study of Torah, the time finally to put all the pieces of the puzzle in place, and thus to understand deeply and profoundly what life truly is all about. To grow old, therefore, is not a blessing simply because it means one has not died young. It is a desirable commodity in its own right. It is the season of life most suffused with wisdom and insight, the crowning achievement of a life earlier, but ideally no longer, rife with struggle, anxiety, and toil. In other words, longevity is a blessing not only because of what old age isn't, it is a blessing too because of what it is, the crowning achievement of a virtuous life lived in harmony with the Torah's eternal values. Something that we don't, in our culture, we don't necessarily agree with or buy into. We've been told, old, you're no good. Life is for the young. Get out of the way, old man. But here we're being told in a different world with different set of values that the idea of being old is something that's wonderful, that you look forward to. And other people look up to you because you're the one with wisdom. Today, on your phone, you can Google anything and figure anything out in a minute. In their world, how are you gonna figure out anything? The answer is you go to somebody who's older, who's experienced, who knows. Old people were venerated in Chinese culture as well. So too in Jewish culture, we venerate the elderly because of what they know, because of what they've lived through. But we live in a very different world. Okay, one more piece, and this is a story, and we'll end here with this story. Chapter 6, Braita number 9. Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. Rabbi Yossi said the following. Pamachat, one time, Hayiti mehalech baderech. I was walking on the road. Ufagabi adam echad. And a man met me. V'natan li shalom. And offered, how are you? He said hello. V'hachzarti lo shalom. And I returned his greeting. Amarli, he said to me, Rabbi, my rabbi, me'eza makom ata. Where are you from, Rabbi? Amarti lo, so I said to him, Me'ir gedolah shel chachamim. I come from a great city of sages, v'shel sofrim ani, and of scribes. Amarli, he said, Rabbi, ritzonach, would you be interested? Shetadur imanu, would you come with us? Come to my town, bimkomenu, where we live. Va'ani etein lach, and if you do, I will give you elef alafim dinarei zahav v'avanim tovot umargaliot. I will give you thousands of gold dinars and the most precious stones and pearls in the world. So here, he's on the rabbinical search committee, and they're looking for a rabbi, and he finds this rabbi, meets him on the road, and he says, would you come to us? Probably lives somewhere in Wyoming or in Montana, and they're willing to pay anything to get this rabbi to come out there. Amarti lo, and I said to him, Im ata notenli, if you give me kol kesef v'zahav, all the silver and gold, va'avanim tovot, and precious jewels, umargoliot, and pearls, sheba olam, that are in the world, Eini dar, I would never move. I would never live. Ella b'makom Torah, except in a place where there is Torah. In other words, there are other people that I can learn from, people who are interested in learning from me, people that I can study with. V'lo od, and not only that, Ella, Shebishat petirato shel adam. When a man leaves this world, ein malavin lo la'adam. He can't take it with him. Lo kesef, velo zahav, velo avanim tovot umargoliot. So suppose I go to you and you make me rich and you pay me all this. When my time comes to leave the world, I can't take it with me, right? Ella, the only thing you can take with you into the world to come when you meet St. Peter at the pearly gates is Torah uma'asim tovim bilvad. They don't want to know how rich you were. They don't want to know anything except how much did you learn and what good deeds did you do. Shene'emar, and as you might imagine, they're going to quote a verse. Where do you think they're going to quote the verse from? The book of Proverbs, chapter 6. Behit halechecha tinche otach. When you walk, it will lead you. B'shach becha tishmor alecha. And when you lie down, it will watch over you. V'hakitzotahi tesichecha. And when you awoke, it will talk with you. And as you can imagine from what we've already seen, the it that it's talking about in the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, is going to be wisdom, which of course the rabbis are going to interpret as Torah, right? So Torah will lead you, it will watch over you, it will constantly whisper in your ear. And when you walk, it will lead you. And now they're going to break down these three clauses and give a meaning to each of them. Behit halechecha tanche otach ba'olam hazeh. When you walk, it will lead you in this world. B'shach becha tishmor alecha. When you lie down, it will watch over you in the grave. In other words, what was originally meant in the book of Proverbs was during the day, wisdom will help you navigate through this life. And when you lie down at night, your wisdom and the way you've led your life will sort of protect you. But of course, the rabbis reinterpret when you lie down in the grave, not when you lie down in your bed at night. And it will be there, will watch over you, bakaver, in the grave. V'hakitzotahi tesichecha. When you awake, it will talk with you, not when you awake from your bed and your sleep next morning, but rather after you lie down in your grave, when you awake in the world to come, it will talk with you in the Olam Haba. Your Torah will be there to accompany you in the world to come. And then we're told, V'kein katuv b'sefer Tehillim. And so also is it written in the book of Psalms, Al Yedei David Melech Yisrael, by King David, who is, according to the rabbis, is the author of the Psalms. And we read the following from Psalm 119, verse 72. Tovli Torat Picha Me'alfei Zahav V'Chesev. The teaching that you have proclaimed to me, Torat Picha, the Torah that came out of your mouth, and the rabbis understand this to mean out of the mouth of God, is Tovli, is better for me, Me'alfei Zahav V'Chesed, than 1,000 pieces of gold and silver. And of course, that verse is clearly where Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma got his answer to the man who said, come to Montana, and we'll pay you a lot of money. V'omer, And it says, and here we quote from the prophet Haggai, Li hakesef, God said, silver is mine, v'li hazahav, and gold is mine, ne'um Adonai tzivaot. All of those things are ultimately mine and belong to me. So that's our class for today. Once again, next week we're going to finish Pirkei Avot, and the following week we're going to begin the study of Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you have a copy of Ecclesiastes in any Bible, great. If you would like, the next 2 weeks, let us know when you're in the neighborhood. Stop by, you can pick up and borrow one of the books so that you could follow in the Hebrew and in the English as we go through the book of Kohelet. So take care, Kol Tuv, all the best.